Welcome, my name is Jason and I am so glad that you're joining with me today. If you are outside of the Fredericton area, I want to say a special thank you for being with us. If you are in the Fredericton area and haven't been able to make it out to a service in person, I want to encourage you to do that. Either way, I hope that this message is supplementary to the community that you're involved in, that it is secondary and an added piece to the local church that you're a part of. And again, I'm very glad that you're joining with me, but it is important that you find a community of believers to be with and to do life with, because I can only do so much and we can only do so much together through this medium. And today I want to tell you, we're starting a brand new series called Parenting Guilt, but we're going to be looking at all kinds of guilt today a little bit, and whether you are a parent, are going to become a parent, whether you're a grandparent or you had a parent at one point in time, which I believe covers all of us, today's message is going to be good for you. And this series is going to be great for you and for our church in general. I want to ask you a question. Have you ever had a week, and I'm going to admit I had a week like this just this past week, where everything seemed to kind of just pile in on you, and you felt like you had pressure from every side, every direction, like you had this overwhelming sense that you didn't measure up, that you didn't feel like you had the skills or the knowledge or the know-how to get done what you needed to get done, to achieve the goals that you had set out in front of you. For some reason, you feel guilty. And surely you must think in your own mind, surely I should have been able to achieve this. I should have been able to get my work done. I should have been able to be a good parent, a good spouse. I should have been able to do my devotions and live up to those things. And there are other people in this world who do it. They do it every day. They figure it out. And you might feel the pressure going, man, why can't I get that figured out? The thing you feel is guilt. And I want to tell you, there are actually two types of guilt that you probably feel. There is a false guilt and there is true guilt. Let me highlight those for you too and walk through those. False guilt is from external pressures. There are things that are pressuring in on us. There are expectations that we've either put on ourselves because of other people's standards, or maybe it's a pressure from a boss or a spouse. There is guilt that has come, or maybe even just like a social expectation. There's guilt that comes that is really false. It's not a guilt that you really should feel the weight of. Now, then there is true guilt. And true guilt comes out of something that you know that you've done wrong, that you've missed the mark, that you don't quite measure up. There's an area in your life that you went to that you shouldn't have gone towards, and now you feel guilt or shame because of that. And you knew going into it that there was going to be a bad outcome. It was a bad choice that you were making. I want to talk to you a little bit about the book of Genesis. And at the very beginning, we have this thing where God has created the earth. He has created everything into being. He has spoken into being. And on day 6, he decides to make man, to create you and I. He created Adam, the first man, and Eve, the first woman. And he placed them in a perfect place at a perfect time in the Garden of Eden. In fact, everything about Earth at that point was absolutely perfect. Not like it is today with the wars and the storms and all of that. It was perfection. They got food and they didn't have to worry about it. They got fruits and vegetables and it was all around and they could just pick it and eat it. And it was amazing. Like nothing you and I can even conceive. There are thoughts we can have, but those don't even measure up to the true reality of what the Genesis creation Garden of Eden looked like. God put 2 trees in the middle of this garden. You know the story. The tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And Adam's duties were clear. Adam's duty was to be fruitful, to multiply, to take care of the garden and all those things. And God set aside this one tree for him. He was not to eat of it. And Adam, being a good husband, passed that warning off to his wife. And then Satan, entered into the garden disguised as a snake. And he did then what he is actually still doing today. You know, I often like to talk about the fact that the devil doesn't have any new tricks, but he has perfected the one that he has. He did exactly then what he does today, and he lied. We see this in Genesis. If you got your Bible, I invite you to open up Genesis 3. Verses 4 and 5. He says this, "You will not surely die." The serpent said to the woman, "For God knows that when you eat of the fruit, and your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." And instead of believing God, Eve believed Satan. She ate the fruit and then gave some to her husband, who ate it as well. And the scriptures tell us that the eyes of both of them were immediately opened. And they realized that they were naked, and they felt shame and guilt, and they decided to grab some fig leaves to cover things up. You see, God would often come down and walk side by side with Adam and Eve, and that's what happens next is God comes down and he starts to look for Adam and Eve, and they're nowhere to be found, and they're hiding away from him. And because of this sin that they did, guilt entered in and shame entered into the world, and God spoke a curse against Satan, Eve, and Adam. You see, God being the parent in this situation could have destroyed Adam and Eve. He could have just started all over again. And he could have used the phrase that maybe you've used or you've heard other parents use, the phrase where you're so mad, you're so steaming, you're upset with your kid that you say, I brought you into this world, I could take you out, right? That was a reality that God actually could have done, but instead he parents as we should parent. Out of his grace and his love, he actually pays for the sacrifice and pays for the guilt himself. He actually kills 2 animals and makes clothes for them so that they may be covered of this newly discovered nakedness. But there was consequences, and they were banished from the Garden of Eden and never to return. Now, I want to tackle an idea here for you. As we walk through this parent series together, there will be 2 things we bump up against. There is an ideal, a particular way that things should be, and a reality, a real that we end up living daily in this life. God had an ideal in the garden, and Adam and Eve made a different choice, and that brought a different reality to the situation. And you might be sitting here thinking about this parenting thing, and maybe you're doing it alone, and that isn't the ideal. And that's a hard truth to understand, and there are circumstances that are all wrapped up in that. But the reality is there is an ideal that we will bump up against in the process of going through this, in the process of studying God's scripture. There is an ideal, but we will be sensitive to understand that there is a reality that we all face and all deal with and have to work around and within. You see, there was an ideal in the garden, but there was a reality that hit. And this is the first instance of guilt and shame coming into the garden. And what did Adam and Eve do when they ate of the fruit, when they sinned? Their eyes were open. And then what did they do? They went and they ran and they hid from God. You can't hide from God. You can't. And this early story teaches us that God knows where they are. In fact, you know what? They tried to take care of the problem themselves. They tried to cover themselves up to make themselves look right and feel better about who they were. They tried to do that on their own. And when that didn't work and they hid, they then blamed not only Satan, but themselves and each other as well. You see, true guilt, not the false guilt I was talking about earlier, true guilt has consequences. God, as the Father, set up boundaries and expectations for humanity, and just like any good parent does, but humanity, being kids like we were, messed it up. And when we did, there are consequences. I often talk in my house to my kids that there are consequences in life, because I want my kids to understand that as they go through life, as they make decisions and choices, it is not just about them and about their situation, but there are consequences that come because of the choices we make. We talk about these consequences, and I want my kids to understand that. But did you know that there are actually good consequences and bad consequences? At the early stages of this conversation with my kids that is ongoing, my kids really only thought there were bad consequences, because a lot of times, to be honest, bad parenting, I was only bringing up the bad consequences in our conversations. But the reality is if I make a good choice, if I make a choice to eat healthy and avoid cheeseburgers and chips like I love, I don't really want to, but if I chose to do that and I chose to exercise, the consequence would be that I am healthier. And that's a good consequence. I'm going to live longer. That's a great consequence. But there are also bad consequences. If I choose to drink alcohol and I drink in excess and I get drunk, and there are consequences for that action. Least of all is the fact that it is illegal to do that, to get behind the wheel of a car and drive it. There are consequences to that action. There's a large consequence and a potential that if I get behind the wheel of a car as I am drunk, that I could injure myself and worse, kill someone else. Those are bad consequences. It's usually those types of consequences, those types of choices where we get the most guilt. But we all struggle with guilt, right? We all struggle with guilt. We carry impure thoughts and lustful thoughts about other people. We carry the guilt of failure, of not measuring up in our spiritual lives, in our personal lives, in our social lives. We carry the guilt of missed opportunities, and we carry the guilt of other people doing things to us, even though that's not right. But we carry that guilt and that shame upon us. But there is a true and a false guilt, just like there's a true and a false guilt. We let society at times in our world define what success is. We let them define what the best is, and we compare ourselves to that. We let them define what is acceptable and what is truth. And when we don't meet those expectations, the burden we feel is guilt. That guilt is like a weight around our necks, one that we carry every day, one that we shoulder the weight of, and sometimes we get crushed beneath. So today I want to offer some tips to parents primarily, but if you're not a parent today, I want you to be thinking of how these same things, these same ideas and principles can actually apply to your own life too, so that you can better manage the guilt and understand where it's coming from and whether or not you should enact upon it or not. There's this thing that I'm calling parent guilt, and I feel it, I know you feel it, and it comes in two forms as well. There is a guilt that we receive from our parents through words and deeds, through habits that we've inherited, that we can feel this guilt from our parents, whether it's a lament because our parents didn't raise us the way that we think we should have been, and also a lament of the fact that our parents still pile guilt onto us. We can feel that type of guilt. The other type of guilt is one that we actually get from our kids as parents, whether it's through our thoughts and our deeds or their words or our missed expectations. We can get guilt from them as well, from whether we give our kids the good things to eat or the bad things to eat, whether we give them too much or too little screen time, whether we discipline them too harshly. And sometimes I feel that. I feel like I may have gone too far, and there are times I know I've talked to parents where they feel like they haven't gone far enough. Am I giving them enough space to learn and to make mistakes and to walk around and start to begin to understand where they fit in this world? Or have I given them so much leeway that I've actually lost control and disaster is actually about to hit? These days, I feel like there's always something I can feel guilty about, whether it's not being able to spend enough time with my kids or disciplining them too harshly or not being there just for them when they needed me. And while parent guilt is very common, it can often make us, you don't get used to it. You can start to feel anxious and unhappy. And guilt is a human trait that we all experience. It's a part of our human nature, and it interacts and gets into everything that we've done, especially the things that we feel like, man, I wish I could have done that better. It would be very difficult, I think, to find any parent who hasn't experienced guilt. Because I think parents enact on this, and we start thinking and replaying all the things that we could have done and should have done and would have done. So much that we pile that guilt onto ourselves. No one else is putting it on us, but we feel it. And we do that to the point where we actually play down some of the positive, some of the really good things we've done in our kids' lives. And we start to feel guilty about all of those things that we've missed out on. There are lots of times that these guilty feelings can strike, and it might have even for you, the first time you felt guilt was when you were bringing the baby home for the first time. Your firstborn was coming home, and the nurse kind of closed the door for you as you were on your way, and you felt the weight of not being able to be a good enough parent. I want to toss a spoiler alert at you. If you aren't a parent yet, you will always feel like you don't measure up. But guess what? You are the right person for the job because you are their parent, and that is what you need to cling to. I want to share some tips to help you cope as you go along in this journey, or maybe help you heal in the journey that you've already been on with any of these feelings of parental guilt, and the importance of accepting the fact that you are doing the best that you can and trying all that you can, and that you're following the Holy Spirit's leading as you guide your children. The first thing I want you to recognize is you need to look at the bigger picture. God had an ideal. And then the real kind of stepped into place. God did not want this to be the case, but ever since that moment, he has been forging a path of redemption for all of humanity. You see, parenting has its ups and downs, and sometimes it can feel like nothing has gone right. You can feel guilty for the stressful send off that you gave them to school, that you just feel that weight that you didn't make them eat their vegetables because they're supposed to eat their vegetables, or maybe you've given them too much TV time, and we get fixated on a particular moment in time. You feel as though your children are having too much screen time or not eating healthy enough, and you feel like you've let them down, but that doesn't necessarily mean you've made all the wrong choices, because if you're focusing only on that's wrong. You need to focus on and acknowledge that today is today, and you know what, tomorrow is another day where I can do better. This is the moment that we're in right now, but tomorrow's moment will be completely different than today's. If your kids are not eating all their vegetables, it's okay. I used to have a hard time with this. I came from a home where what was put on your plate, you ate, and you got it all in. But you know what? If they don't eat all their vegetables today, you've got tomorrow to try and do better. Number 2, let go of the idea of being a perfect parent. You want your children to be happy, but when you put the pressure on yourself to be a perfect parent, you can actually just pile on more guilt onto yourself, especially when normal things happen, like regular things of life. When you run out of time and you can't support your kid exactly how you wanted. There are nights that I work late, and I'm sure you do as well, and you don't make it home in time for bedtime routine and tuck-in and prayers and things like that and whatnot, and that can pile on a lot of guilt for you. But you are not a perfect parent. And wanting what you want, wanting the best for your children is not a bad thing. But when we begin to focus as parents on just that, and that's the whole thing, when it's so much, then it becomes debilitating, and we are actually ineffective as parents. Accepting that there's no such thing as a perfect parent can help you manage the guilt that you might feel on a day-to-day. Number 3, avoid this information overload. And maybe today there's going to be a little bit of an information overload for you today. Chew on the meat and spit at the bones, okay? I want to help you. But when it comes to raising our kids, I know that when Marla and I first started out, I think there were so many books that kind of were handed to us or that we went and searched after, and there's just too much information. You need to be able to trust a little bit into yourself and the instincts that you have. But when in doubt, do read some books. Do follow a sermon series like this and gain other people's perspectives. But be careful as to who you choose. That's my number 4. Talk to other parents. Early on when I was starting to raise our children, what I was looking for and what you should be looking for are parents who have a good relationship with their teens, who love Jesus and have a good relationship with their teens, because you want to know how they did that. You want to know how they were able to get through the tumultuous younger years and into these teen years where they have their trust and where they have their respect and that they love Jesus. But I want to encourage you, find those people and try and balance the information that you receive within the context of your own children, because each child is unique and different. Number 5, I want you to take some time for yourself. We can feel guilty about this. The fact that we want to kind of, and this doesn't, I don't mean this in the wrong way, but we want to get away from our kids every once in a while, right? We do. And that just means we get to love them more, right? I tell my kids all the time, mom and dad are going on a date and you can't come, but that's just so we have more time away from you so we can be back to love you better. But sometimes we feel the guilt of that when we are not able to do the things that we used to do, right? When we go out on dates or we want to go and exercise and do something for ourselves, we get this idea that as parents, we're supposed to sacrifice everything, even ourselves, for them. And I believe that as parents, we take on that burden, and a portion of that is true. But if you are not happy and you are not healthy, you are not going to be good. You need to learn how to find time to get scripture into you, to make sure your relationship with Jesus is good and strong, to make sure you're able to rest, that you're able to worship. When you're happier, when you're more connected to the Spirit and more connected to Jesus, then I guarantee you will be a better parent. Number 6. Try not to compare yourself to other parents. And this one is tough. It is, because you see the way that they parent and you see how their kids are acting and you're like, why can't my kid do what your kid does? And sometimes you might be tempted to look on Instagram or Facebook and see this amazing post from this family, and you're like, man, they've just got it all together. I want to let you in on a little secret. It's probably not 100% true. I'm sure they were smiling for those 5 minutes to get those photos done, but the 5 minutes before, they were ripping each other's hair out. I promise, I have seen it. We have posted those photos before. Do not try and compare yourself to other people's parenting, because even what you see is not 100% truth. All parenting has its ups and its downs for everyone. Number 7, focus on the little wins. We all have challenging days with our kids every now and then, but rather than feeling guilty about what went wrong, why not try and focus on what's going right? Your kids love you. They're patient. They're good. They're obedient. Maybe the win for the day is they ate their vegetables, or they didn't throw them on the floor, right? I mean, maybe that's it. You need to focus on the little wins. Don't think about a day in its entirety. Don't think about all of the things. Find one thing that you can find victory and a win in, and continue to drive towards those things. Those little wins sometimes are just as important as the big ones. Number 8. It's the last one. Keep things in perspective. Another time that parental guilt can kind of kick in is on birthdays and at Christmas. And you know what? We feel this sometimes as a family. We don't tend to go all out and big. Sometimes we can't. Sometimes we're not able to. And there is this tendency to want to meet your kids' expectations and their wants rather than their needs and their desires. But the reality is you need to keep it in perspective. You are providing the core things they need. You are providing them love and a safe home and guidance towards Jesus. If you are doing those things, you are doing an adequate job. You're doing a great job. It's more important to recognize that you are providing their core needs than anything they want. Remember, you are the vital part to this child's development, to your kid's development. I want you to know those things and work through those things, because I believe that guilt can actually allow us to compromise and confuse our priorities. And over the next 2 weeks, that's what we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at how our priorities can get confused and compromised when guilt comes into play. So we need to be able to get rid of the guilt and be continually aligning with the priorities of raising our children in the right way. And the right way is not dictated by what the world has to say. The right way is dictated by what scriptures say and how to raise our children up so that they may follow after Jesus. And it's Jesus who defines what the priorities in our lives are, what the priorities are in your life. And if your priorities are defined and well and true and focused in on Jesus, your children's will come into line. Matthew 11:28-30 says this. This is the words of Jesus. He says, "Come to me. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Any parents out there needing a little bit of rest today? He says this, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble at heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." The guilt you feel is not from Jesus. He has a burden, or he has a yoke that is for you, that is light and easy, because he is shouldering the weight. He is the one taking the responsibility. All we need to do is keep our eyes focused on him, fixed on him, and following after him. And we will have a greater understanding of what he wants for us as parents to our children. And I want you to do this. I want you to take his yoke upon you. Not the yoke of this world, not the opinions of this world, not even your own opinions. I want you to hear his word and his voice over these next few weeks as he speaks to you through this series. Don't take anyone else's yoke. Don't take anyone else's expectations, but his. And let me say this near the end here. Don't place your weight on your children. Point them to Jesus. Allow them to have a relationship with the one who is guiding you. Because when you are being guided by the Father, when you are being guided by Jesus himself, then you are on the right path to good, solid parenting and getting rid of the weight of this parenting guilt you may feel. So I want to invite you next week as we continue this series, as we dive in to find out what God truly has for us, as we try and parent this next generation to follow after him. Would you pray with me? God in heaven, we've come before you today, and we thank you for your word and what you're speaking into us and teaching us. And Lord, right now I pray for all those parents out there who are feeling the weight and the burden and the guilt that they may feel from not measuring up. Lord, I ask that today they would follow these steps and they would measure their expectations. They would realize that they're not perfect and that they need to follow after you. And Lord, if there are those who are watching today who aren't parents at this moment, Lord, would you encourage them to pray for those who are going through this, who are fighting this, and maybe they've gone through it before and they haven't dealt with that guilt. Lord, would they lay it at your feet today? Would they awaken themselves and be awakened to you in a new path and a new light towards parenthood? In the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, we praise you and we thank you. Thank you so much for joining with me today. It has been good to be with you. We hope that you have a blessed week, and we will see you next time.